So here we are. I've got a massive smile on my face because I know where we're going with this one today. But this is around qualifications, certification, accreditation, and just, I guess, the value, the perceived value of doing something that is an investment of time and money to go on a journey of learning, to get a certificate at the end, because either for your own self-fulfillment or because the market might demand it or you think you require it. And noticing that the world is shifting potentially its relationship with certifications and accreditations, where back in the day it used to be you have to have one at a certain level, and we're seeing organizations now, which we'll get into, who are maybe taking the focus off the level or even the need for degrees or this kind of thing. So I think we just want to get into that conversation about, in this day and age, maybe, or how important, how valid is certification and qualifications.
Yeah, I get it. Since we've been chatting about this for a while, a number of themes have kind of emerged in my mind, just sort of thinking this through, because I think there are at least two, and probably more, but certainly two almost polar opposite reasons for having and doing qualifications. One is the kind of control regulatory reason, that you can't do profession X unless you do qualification Y. I've got a daughter who's a doctor. Thank goodness, she's not allowed to practice a doctor unless she's got a medical qualification. Thank goodness. And if she was a brain surgeon, I'd be even more pleased, about that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can you do brain surgery? Don't know, never tried, but I'll give it a go. That kind of that's not too helpful. But the other is so there's a control and regulatory function, but there's also the kind of educational function, which is to say, there is a route to becoming expert in a particular field. And when you've got to a certain level of proficiency, we will give you a qualification to signify that. And it seems to me that that if we rail against qualifications, it's that in the case of the regulation, we somehow slightly doubt that all of the control that's exercised around qualifications is necessary. So, for example, I know you've been writing recently quite a lot about coaching qualifications, and the question is, you don't need to have a coaching qualification in order to coach. Should you have one? And an awful lot of people are insisting that you do. And they won't let you. It's like throwing a six to start. If you haven't got a qualification, you can't practice that in our organization. But the other thing is, if you haven't done a qualification, have you learned the requisite knowledge and skills, and have you developed and had tested the requisite attitudes that will help you as a coach? And so I think that the whole thing turns, in fact, the link between the two is, if the educational function genuinely guarantees quality, then why wouldn't you do it, irrespective of whether you rail against the control?
That's interesting, and that's probably one of the key points, is if it actually does. And I think everybody would have an experience, or has probably heard of an experience, of somebody that's qualified in any profession you wish to name, where it's been a brilliant experience. That doctor was fabulous, that architect was fabulous, or whatever it was. They're certified and it was excellent. And there's another story that goes with that. Well, not mine. It was shocking experience. So I don't limit this to coaching. I think there's just something about, and yet, back to your point, I really do want certain people to be qualified, because of the nature of it. And it's quite interesting the way you might go, well, if I wanted a photographer, do I need them to have a certification or an accreditation, or do I just say, can I have a look at your portfolio? I'm not interested. I don't think they need to be certified. Do they take a damn good photo? Yes, they do. But then there's somewhere along the line where that becomes, no, I do want them to have a qualification. Well, does the qualification mean they're even good at it? Well, it may not, but it may.
Have you thought much about your own attitudes to that, and thought, under what circumstances do I want them to have a qualification versus I'm not fussed?
Yes, and there's something about the I was going to almost say the importance of the outcome. And there is something there that says, your brain surgeon or your psychiatrist or your accountant, or there are certain roles that if it goes wrong potentially at quite a seismic level. Now, I don't necessarily think that in fact, I'm absolutely convinced that there is not always a connection between somebody having a certification and them being a high quality role model of practitioner. But I do like the idea that it's at the very least setting a standard of knowledge. It's at the very least setting an expectation of what quality looks like. There's something there, because surgeons get struck off, right? Accountants get struck off. Sure. They're being held to account. And there seem to be some things that are market led. That photographer doesn't get much business if he's not a very good photographer. But that's because probably I can judge that. That to me is a good photo. I can't judge if you're a good brain surgeon very much. So I do need somebody else to tell me, perhaps.
There is that. But I'm thinking also, I'm wondering if it's where the outcome is a matter of taste, and taste is so personal, then it may well be that you trust your own judgment around that rather than anyone else's. As you say, a photographer. It's not a question of is he a good photographer or is she a good photographer? It's an issue is, do I personally like the pictures he or she takes?
Correct. Yeah.
And we tell ourselves that that's about being a good photographer. It isn't. It's about personal judgment. Is this a good singer? Well, the question is, do I like the voice? Am I prepared to listen to it? And so that entirely subjective, individualistic set of criteria, in a sense, only you can apply them. No one can do it for you, although occasionally we might find a theatre critic, say, in a newspaper whose judgments we tend to go along with, and therefore if they say it's a good play, the chances are I'll like it as well. But that's not quite the same. So I think that's the first distinction I think we maybe need to make, is that if the outcome is a matter of personal taste, then what value does a qualification add? Probably not a whole lot. But when the outcome is of a different nature, a matter of life and death, brain surgery, whatever it may be, or can this person, fly this jet airliner? Please be qualified. I don't before I get on it. Then those things, when they're matters of life and death, when they're dangerous, then maybe we want someone else to have taken some of the uncertainty away from us, and that may be a function of qualifications as well.
So I've written there things of consequence. And I don't mean your wedding photographs, wouldn't be a disaster if they didn't come out well. Yes. But it's not quite the same as you say, being a pilot or whatever it is. There are certain things that have manifest consequences.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would offer safety as one of those kind of basic, qualifications, qualification related issues. If it's a matter of safety, so if it's a civil engineer who's going to put a bridge up, I don't want the bridge to fall down, please. An architect who's going to put up a building, I don't want that to fall down, please. There's a whole bunch of professions, the qualifications of which do suggest that this person knows how to operate safely within that profession.
And I really buy into that. I think there's something that says that certification indicates to others that you have a knowledge base, at the very least, that is of a standard. Now, whether or not you then, as a practitioner, are able to hold that level, or you stay relevant, or actually can even apply that knowledge, well, that will come out, in due course. But there's a signification, and I guess this question about qualifications, for me, we're a fundamentally leadership-based podcast. So if we say, if you pick up the stick, you get both ends. So if you pick up the qualification stick at one end, you're going, probably not that relevant. If it's helped you get good, brilliant. If you did it and it's enabled you, fantastic. At the other end, well, regardless of anything else, I want to know that you know things to a certain level. So
it's a good question you're asking implicitly, which is, if I want to appoint someone to a leadership position, should I be asking them about whether they've got a qualification in leadership? You know, there aren't that many. You know, and not many people have them. So is it going to add any value at all?
And I get it as a coach. So I think there's a difference between being a psychiatrist and a coach. There are certain things where I will go, well, I'd like my psychiatrist to be certified. I'm not so bothered if my coach is. Now, that's a matter of preference, but I have it almost from being a consequence to a taste, perhaps. Oh, I've lost you. Okay, I've just restarted the recording. Yeah, so I want my, you know, I don't, and again, these are some things that are kind of make absolute sense, and then some of them are, or does that really pan out in other people's minds? You know, I want my psychiatrist to be qualified. I think they're dealing with things that have consequence at a very, very real level. You know, my coach, it's important. You know, like my wedding photographs coming out are important, but in terms of consequence, it's interesting. They're still really important things, but I have less of a requirement on a Guy Bloom personal level that you offer me an accreditation. I want testimonials. I want proof. But I also want that of the person who's got the qualification at the other end as well, which is, it's a funny standard.
I think what I'm getting from you, Guy, here is that what you're doing is realizing that there are very few absolute certainties in this world, and certainly in the world of professional practice, there are very few. But what you're looking for is anything that can shorten the odds for you. You know, so that if you're going to place a bet,
yes,
you know, how short can I get these odds that there's, so that it becomes, you know, as close to a certainty as possible that this thing's going to be okay. And, you know, qualifications in some fields might be one of those ways of shortening the odds. Getting testimonials from people is another way. You know, I'm just thinking about, you know, this morning before we had our conversation, someone came to the door who my wife had asked to come and talk about our garden, you know, and why is that woman coming to talk to us about our garden? Because we've talked to other people and her name has come up a few times as being, you know, a really good gardener and garden designer. Okay, so that shortens the odds a bit. And that whole idea of rated people, Trustpilot, you know, there's a whole variety of different ways in which people are trying to shorten the odds that they won't sort of waste their money or get into a mess or whatever it may be. And it may well be that qualifications can help you reduce the odds a bit. But so that would make them neither necessary nor sufficient in a lot of walks of life. But if it's a regulatory function, then they become necessary, but still not sufficient. So, you know, you've got to find other ways too of validating someone's expertise.
And this is, I think, where it, for me, is about the weight of qualifications that are sometimes given that I think are out of kilter. So I do believe in a jigsaw piece. What are your past experiences? What are people saying about you? Testimonials. How do you respond to certain knowledge questions I've got? There's a set of jigsaw pieces that would make me go, yeah, that seems to add up. The holistic view of this person seems to add to that. Now, what I think I rail against is when certain things are given a weight that seems to counteract anything else. When an individual or an organization may say, you see it in job descriptions, must have a degree, and you go, what, to be a sales director? Why would that be relevant? You know, no, it's an opinion, but I would go, there must be 100 sales directors that don't have degrees that are awesome. Why have you weighted it like that? And that's the bit where I noticed my own reaction to
you start to rail against that a bit.
Yes, I find that it's a jigsaw piece. It could be incredibly relevant. Why? They're a quantity surveyor. I want to make sure they're operating to a certain standard. It's now weighted that's now a heavier weight versus, well, actually, no, that person's not doing that level for you. Why do you need that? And that's, I think, where I find I get I have an anxiety around almost, it's like a fairness thing, weirdly. I think that's what it might be.
Interesting. I mean, if that job description had said this person must be intelligent, articulate, and knowledgeable about our specialist field, you wouldn't rail against it. But it may well be that that organization has discovered that if they've got a degree in, real estate or whatever it may be, then it reduces the odds for them, because remember, they're also in the odds reduction business.
Yes.
And so maybe what they're saying is, most graduates I've met in this field are reasonably intelligent, reasonably articulate, and reasonably knowledgeable in our field. And if they're not, then we can teach them quite quickly because they've already demonstrated some proficiency for learning.
Yes, so I think that's a big point. There's something about when somebody offers a certification, it says, I care, I'm interested, I'm curious, I take this seriously, I put weight on learning and staying relevant and being challenged about my own opinions. And where do I go to get that? Well, this can be quite isolated work that we do, whatever it might be. And actually, if I go there and I do this intervention for 6 months or 3 years or whatever it is, I will receive challenge. I will receive new information. I will be held to some form of a standard. So you don't know me, but what that does is signify that you would want those things in me. And of course, I could tell you that I do it, or I can say this piece of paper says that this is what I do. So that's a massive value.
But then you then need to choose quite carefully between the institutions giving the qualification. Let's just take an MBA as an example.
Yes.
An MBA has kind of become commoditized, and an awful lot of American universities offer, I mention particularly American ones because I know that this is true from personal experience, because I've experienced, in a sense, both ends of the distribution. I've taught in Harvard Business School, where the MBA is of enormous value and is very, very expensive, by the way. I'm talking about, over $100,000 to get an MBA from Harvard. And I've also taught in a kind of open access Midwestern American university where they also do MBAs. Now, if what you want is to have an MBA rather than to do an MBA, you should go where the fence is lowest and get in where it's cheapest and just quickly add those letters to your name. But if you get a Harvard MBA, you can guarantee a number of things. And one of them is a very unusual one, and that is to do with the way they teach the course. So for example, it's entirely case-based, and I do mean entirely. So they teach case after case after case after case. However long the course is, they'll have done 4 cases a day, every day, throughout the length of the course. But the way they teach cases means you've got to assimilate information, you've got to understand it, you're given lots of opportunities to discuss it in small groups, and then there is the kind of the trial of the formal teaching of the case. And what happens is you sit in a classroom of, let's say, 50 people or 80 people, quite a large number. And the professor will, at random, say, right, Guy, what did you think about the chief executive's first decision? And you've got to say, A, what it was. So you need to have read it. Otherwise look like a real plonker. And secondly, you need to have an opinion about it. And third, you've got to defend that opinion because the professor will disagree with you, or he'll probe it, or she will, challenge it in some way. And some of the marking that goes into that Harvard MBA is how well, not only do you understand the cases, how well do you do your preparation and all of that, but it's also to do with how well do you defend your position when challenged in front of a big audience. So when the stakes are high and the adrenaline's flowing, how well do you then defend that case? Now, if you want someone who's intelligent, articulate, and knowledgeable, I suggest to you that something like a Harvard MBA is going to give you not an absolute guarantee, but a pretty strong recommendation that those 3 things are going to be there. Get an MBA from Poughkeepsie, Nowhereville, junior college or whatever, and the chances are that you won't get anything like that degree of quality because A, the selection has not been so rigorous, but B, the education's not been so rigorous on high stakes either. So choosing between qualifications according to the institution that's granted them might also be an additional factor here.
I think this is massive because I think when you said that commoditization is a big thing. So, I work in that leadership space, you do. I come across exec coaches and I know for a fact that some of these courses, I mean, I asked the question, has anybody ever failed? So I get addressed, I get somebody, you know, Guy, would you like to come on our certification course? I get those, you know, sometimes they'll ring through, they, you know, they find my number, I get a call, I go, can I just ask a question before you get going? Can I fail? Now they don't know really what I'm like. And I just ask that question, can I fail? And do you know what I get most of the time? They won't say no. What they'll say is, we'll work with you until you succeed. And I go, yeah, that's what I thought. And instead of, oh yes, it's not so much that it's hard to get, you have to be of a standard. So be under no illusions. If you do not meet a criteria of whatever, you know, like the Harvard criteria of your robustness of your thought, your ability to hold space on your opinions, your blah, 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 whatever it is, then no, we're not going to allow you to walk away with a certificate with our name on it, unless you are at the very least of a certain standard. Now, I would actually, as a 50-year-old, relatively seasoned coach, I would go, do you know what, that sounds very interesting. It's a challenge. I'd be held to account. I'd have to really show my muster versus, and here's the other thing, and I hear about it, I know a lot of coaches, they're signing you up for the advanced certificate while you still haven't passed the one that you're on.
Yeah, it's generating income.
And I hate it. I hate everything about it. And I think that's what I don't rail against qualifications. I have no issue with certifications. I think they're massively important. I think what I have an issue with is the commoditization of it and people who hold up their certificates as validation over their actual competence.
And that can happen. But incidentally, if you asked Harvard, can people fail? They'd say, yes, they can, but not many people do. And the reason is not because they want to sort of somehow, you know, find a way of getting you through, kind of gaming the system. It's not that at all. They hold their standard very high. But what they do is they insist on something that I've always railed against as a professional, which is forced ranking. They make every professor force rank everyone in their class.
Right.
And the reason they do it, they know all the arguments about, you know, it's not about, you know, the rank order. It's about, have you reached the standard? But they say, if you're in the bottom 10% in one semester, we are going to put you on special measures for the next semester, in which case you get extra tuition to make sure that you don't stay in that bottom 10%. So there's always someone in the bottom 10%.
Yeah, but it's driving it up.
But yeah, but they're lopping off the bottom of the distribution by pushing it up, not by taking people out, like, you know, the Jack Welch used to do.
I was going to say, it's not the GE model of the bottom 10%. It's the bottom 10%. Get them up. 10%.
No.
Yeah, I love it.
Extra help to the bottom 10% so that they don't stay in that, and they don't stay in it. They've got the data to show it.
Yeah.
Because I challenged that. I thought, oh God, forced ranking, that's awful. You know, why do you do that? And then they explained, and I thought, oh, okay. I get that, because they really do want if you're going to come in and we're going to take all that money from you, we're going to make sure you've got every chance of reaching this very high standard that we set, you know. And now, you know, I've also had to teach at Oxford, you know, and it's a great opportunity to, when you get a chance to work at some of the best universities in the world, not just in the country, you know, they really do take standards incredibly seriously. So, and now I get a wonderful opportunity to teach at Henley, and Henley's been a groundbreaking business school for many years, since it helped demobbed soldiers to come back into civil life by getting a business qualification. And so these groundbreaking world-class institutions really do offer qualifications that I think are palpably of higher quality than an awful lot of other institutions.
And I think that's maybe one of the things, isn't it, where those that know the difference know the difference. But for those that don't, that's why the market is able to get, not the market, certain players in the market are able to get away with offering almost a toilet roll tear here certificate, because the layman or even people in organizations but who are making decisions don't really understand the inherent truths of looking behind the curtain on what might be behind a certificate. And so they're allowed to work and prosper. And I noticed this. I've taught martial arts since I was, a wee nipper, that. And one of the things when I was running courses is I'd noticed that some courses people would come on and you've got the black belt. She's taken 3, 5, 10 years to become a black belt, whatever it is. And then reality-based martial arts started to come out. And you can go on a 19-day course and become an instructor.
Wow.
Now, I kind of go, Now, if it's, look, you're already a fully fledged, capable black belt, come on our course, we'll give you our skills, and in 19 days, you can represent us. Okay, I could wrap my head around that. But no. You can walk off the street and go and do it. And 19 days later, you're a level 1 instructor. So, okay, I used to write about that and go, this is not right, but I can live with it. And then they started, for marketing purposes, you're a level 1 black belt. Now, you can't stop them doing that. But it broke a code. It broke a promise to the world that black belt means something. When you meet a black belt, they should, they've been through the ringer, they've been challenged, they've had years of etc. And you're letting somebody have one in 19 days. Well, I'll tell you what, let them meet one of my 5-year veteran black belts and let me know how that works out for them. But the point was, what I saw was that the layman, when they start up their club, which is they're applying to the one, they're going, hey, most people, of course, they go, oh, you got a black belt. And, oh, you got a certificate on the wall. And I go, yeah, Houston, we have a problem.
Yes. What you're saying is, that to the uninitiated,
yes,
certain qualifications seem to signify more than they do to the initiated. But I think also, in a sense, you and I might need to just own our life stories as well, because what you've done in martial arts is you've really taken that whole world with such respect that you've devoted, and I think that's the right word, you've devoted yourself rather than applied yourself, you've devoted yourself to really learning it thoroughly, ground up, properly, and in all respects. Now, of course, there are more things you can learn, but given the years and the application and the time you've spent within those years learning about your craft of martial arts, no wonder experts come to you for advice, because you are probably the expert's expert, and that can only be worthy of respect, because that kind of dedication has to be not its own reward, but has to admit you to a kind of special relationship with that subject that you're working with. I've done the same with university education, but maybe even to a lesser degree than you. But I am the only kid in my extended family that went to university. I was the first child. There have been others since, but I was the first one that went to university. And I had a sense that it was, for me, a kind of somewhere between a passport or a rite of passage. I'm not sure what's the best metaphor here, but my parents, who both left school at 14 with no qualifications at all, and took up jobs, packing shirts into boxes in the hosiery industry in the rag trade in Nottingham. I have this little image of them on a desert island, and I was born on that little desert island, and they found a little boat that had education written on the side of it, and they dropped me into that little boat, and they pushed me away from the shore and waved to me, in great love, to say, I don't know where that boat's going to take you, kid, but I'm absolutely sure it'll be a better place than here, so they, in great faith, sacrificed quite a lot to get me an education. And when I chose to and got into university eventually, and then worked for a couple of years, and then went back to university and did a doctorate, what I found was that each it was like rising up, those flights of locks that longboats go up.
Yes.
Each time I did the next thing, it took me to a different level.
Yes.
And it was not just a level of education and qualifications, it was a different level of aspiration, and a different peer group. So, by the time when I started as, an 11 plus candidate as a kid, and I got into grammar school, suddenly my expectations started to change. Then I got to university and my expectations took another, I went up the next lock, and then I got to Oxford and did my doctorate, and I went up to the next level in the flight of locks, and now when I think about who are my peers, it's fashioned by all of the folks I met on that journey. And qualifications have come as a kind of marker of this flight of locks that I've been up.
I get that. And do you know what? I've just had a little bit of an epiphany, actually, which is my issue is, if I've got one, along with many of my others, it's the devaluing of the quality of certification in any realm. In particular, it would be exec coaching with me, or obviously martial arts with me, but I realize my angst isn't with certification. My angst is actually, if having a certificate pretty well meant, look, there might be the odd rogue, but if you've got the didgeridoo qualification, you're good. Right. I'd say, no, we should all have it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But actually, because there's more, if I was actually going to say in my mind right now, get a scale, let's just take coaching, because it is one of those, everybody wants to be a coach, right? Let's take out being a doctor, because they've all got them and we can see the value in that. Let's get this slightly ambiguous space of coaching, right? Everybody wants to be a coach. And you go, if I was going to take every coaching qualification I think I know about and put really worth doing versus possibly, but probably not, I'm pretty sure I'd have a hell of a lot more in the possibly not camp than I would in the high value. Yeah, look, if you're going to do one, that's the one you want to do. We should all be doing that one.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this is about. It's the devaluation of it. And then when I see people putting their validity on what I would class as a devalued certification and experience, that's when I get a double whammy of, if you are holding up that pure blue mantle one, I go, fair enough, my friend, that's a cracker and we should all have that one. But I don't. And I think that's where I get the hump, frankly.
Yeah, and I think that one of the ways in which the world of education has changed in my lifetime is that when I went to university, I think I may have this out by a significant margin, but it's of the order of 10% of kids went to university. Now, well, certainly 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, it was more like 50 to 60% of kids went to university. Now, I'm not quibbling about that. I'm perfectly happy for everyone to go to university and let everyone go up that flight of locks. That's so that they can, learn the things that university can teach. Great, but in order to do that, don't water down the standards that you're going to mark people against.
Yes.
And what I found was, particularly working at the Midwestern American University that I got a chance to work at as a visiting professor, what I found was that because it was an open access course, so anyone, you didn't need any qualifications to get there. They would let you in. Because what their initial mission was to scoop up people who missed out on education the first time around. Great laudable aim, fantastic. So like the only open university, they have no entry qualifications. You can just go. But what I then said was, what do you therefore do in your first year? In two respects. One is to weed out the people who really are not going to make it. I mean, there'll be, and there was definitely a subgroup that however much effort you put in the 3-4 years they had there, they just wouldn't get to degree level. That, what are you doing to weed them out, and when do you do it, and how do you do it? Yeah. And then secondly, what do you do with that next group up, which are the people that might be able to make it to degree level, to a decent degree standard, but boy, they've really got to work at it. So what are you doing to distinguish the first group from that group? And what do you do to put in extra effort. I was thinking Harvard, you know, that they put in the extra to make sure that people get pushed up to that level, rather than dilute the quality of the qualification. And yet what I did see, you know, far more often than I was comfortable with, was that they had the language of educational excellence, but they had the practice of educational tolerance to the point of dilution.
Yeah, this is big because a couple of things to pull on there. I think this tolerance and this and I don't have the answer, you know, because you know who would come in and clean anything up and create a standard that we'd all agree with and accept. I mean, that's a whole different conversation. There's ultimately a responsibility in people doing the homework and maybe educating yourself to the point where you then can make a decision before just waiting to go to an institution to get educated. There might be something there that I think is quite relevant. But when I had people come on my courses back in the day with the martial arts stuff that I did, I would often say they would all be instructors in their own right. And I'd say, look, let's do a move. And it would be against a weapon of some type. And I go, we're going to go at quarter speed because I don't want to lose an eye and I don't know you. So we're going to go at quarter speed. Do your move that you would do to take this weapon off me. And we're going to go at quarter speed. 75% of the time it wouldn't work when they did it. Sometimes it did, and I go, cracking, boom, nailed it. 75% of the time it didn't. And they would always say to me, oh, it works when I do it at the club. Why is it not working here? And I go, well, because you're in a place of positional power and because the room is submissive to you, so they let it work, but nobody here is. So you've not actually been challenged in a group of peers. And then they go, oh, and I go, so can I just ask you a question? Are you going to take it out of your syllabus? And do you know what? 20% would go, yeah, that needs to come out. It obviously doesn't work. But the majority went, no. And I will go, why? And they go, well, it's in the syllabus. And if I reduce the syllabus, then I've got less to teach. And it is my income. And I go, okay, you and I can't be friends.
Yeah.
Because you know it doesn't work. You're offering it as reality-based self-defense, and you're still prepared to teach it. Yeah. Then we're done. Because I can't hold that. And so this is that permission.
What you're saying all the way through, Guy, is I'm okay with qualifications provided they mean something.
This is what my epiphany has been. I've couched it before in, has the qualification made you better? Yes. Well, then crack on. I think it's a beautiful thing. But don't hold up the qualification as a validity. And actually what I realize is you may not be doing that from a position of ignorance. You believe that what you've got is good. But actually, if we look at it as a market overview, we actually say, no, that qualification is itself not of a high standard. And that's my issue with it. It's that ongoing acceptance, permission, money-based validity of making things also more complex than they need to be. So here's another thing. I've just pulled this up because we have spoken about it before, but Google relatively recently announced that they're calling it Google Career Certificates. I'll just very quickly read this out to you. They're calling it Google Career Certificates. They teach foundational skills that can help job seekers immediately find employment. However, instead of taking years to finish, like a traditional university degree, these courses are designed to be completed in 6 months.
Yeah. So it's taken a very pragmatic approach to the basics that you need in order to succeed in the world of work. Whereas for years in education, there's been a really active debate about what is the purpose of education? What's it for? How do you know if it's any good? I've taken the view that I think that the purpose of education is to enable curiosity. It's a rather sort of highfalutin way of saying that you know, education needs to do two things. One is it needs to encourage people to be curious, but also it needs to equip people to investigate the things that they're curious about. And if education can do those things, then I think it really serves us all well. And it doesn't, and you can do that in any subject, may I say. You know, you can
Yes.
learn those skills of hypothesis formation, hypothesis testing, and all of that, whether you're studying English literature or whether you're studying chemistry. You know, you can learn all of that within any subject. And the thing that made me alert to this is that I'm very conscious that I did my first degree in psychology years and years and years ago, decades ago. And what am I left with? I'm left with the odd snippets of knowledge that were true then. I don't know if they're true now, because I've not, you know, in physiological psychology, I've not studied that for decades, you know, so I don't know if they're still true. But what I'm left with is the ability to think like a psychologist. And I think of that as almost like the kind of the homeopathic dose. You know, there are no bits of the substance in it, but there's something about the
Yeah.
way that you set out a question and tackle it and investigate it, which was taught to me years ago. And I'm still left with that. And I'm still glad I've got it. And I think that if we can be really clear about what the purpose of a qualification is, then I can perfectly happily endorse what Google are doing to say, you know, if the purpose of this qualification is just to be able to fix this kind of computer in that kind of situation, we can teach you how to do that in 3 weeks. Fine, go do that. But if what you want is to understand the world of IT or AI, and you want to be able to speak articulately about it and evaluate new developments in that field and so on, you might need to do something that looks much more like a degree, because those are the things that people will spend time helping you work with.
And I think this is where, when I kind of think of this summary point on all of this, is can you get a lot of this by being in forums, by being active in social media, by talking to people? Yeah, you probably can. So why the certificate? And I think there's something about, you know, when you say performance management, and generally speaking, in most organizations, it's a negative, you know, oh, you're being performance managed. It's because we don't own the word, which is, no, it's inherently true for what we're all doing. And there needs to be something about that reclaiming of certification. And there's something about our relationship with it that says, I want it to be hard. I don't know if this is the right word, but I want it to have its trials and tribulations. People talk about sort of the safe spaces in universities and things like that. And, you know, we don't want certain books on the curriculum. And Jordan Peterson said something which, you know, agree or like or love or hate Jordan Peterson. But he said, you know, the whole point about, you know, education is it's not supposed to be safe. It's supposed to be difficult. You're supposed to be challenged. You're supposed to be stretched. You're supposed to find it uncomfortable. You're supposed to find your strength within it, but probably when you've been challenged along the route to get there. And I think this is something about when you're going to offer that you have a certificate, or when you're an organization saying we will give you a certificate. I think there's something about really recognizing what was done there. Was it just learning? Was it actually a bit of a farm just to get people through? Or actually, no, there's a reputation here about, not impossible to get, but maybe it's the Harvard position of, you know, there's a reason we're charging £100,000. Why? Well, we are a money-making institution, but you're not going to give us 100,000 unless you're pretty well committed, you know, and we're going to, etc. So there has to be something about that I think we need to reclaim if we're going to be proud of the thing that we're labeling ourselves with. I have this thing. What's it worth?
I've always believed that it's a really heady mixture if you can both challenge and support people. But one of my colleagues, Sue Binks at Henley the other day, put it in a nutshell. She said, in our education, we need to be able to challenge the argument, but support the person.
Yes.
And if education can do that, if it can challenge your output, but support you as an individual in the process,
yes,
that's good. And that for me is good. That's a safe enough space. So I, don't feel that if I've made a poor argument, that I'm somehow going to be regarded as less of an individual, less of a person. But simply that there's something to learn about putting a better argument together.
Yeah.
And I think if education can do that, it's going to serve all of us pretty well. But again, just on one tiny personal note, if I may,
Of course,
I'm an only child, and my mum, bless her, she had no education, to say, past the age of 14. And I once asked her, she's long dead, but I once asked her, of all the things that my parents had enabled me to do by sort of supporting me through education, I said, what are you proudest of? And I'm thinking, I've written books, I've got a doctorate, and you know what she said? She said, when you passed your 11 plus. That's what she was proudest of. And I think it's because that's the last time I did something in the world of education that she fully understood.
Yes.
She knew what that meant. And she somehow knew that I'd gone through a gate into another field.
Yeah.
And
She knew it was the launch pad.
That's a better metaphor, maybe, that yes, I'd kind of jumped on the springboard and it had gone down and thrown me up in the air. Now it's up to me,
Yeah.
but I do think that this thing about qualifications that you've rightly raised is that an awful lot of people really don't understand what the qualification's about.
Yes.
And so it's easy to misattribute, to overestimate it or to underestimate it if you really don't know anything about it. And an awful lot of us with most qualifications, I look at certain letters after people's names and I think, what the dickens is that? No, never seen that before. No idea if it's any use. It's just that an awful lot don't. But of course, with those that are more commonplace, like a degree, any institution, it could be something really quite substantially different from another one.
So to bring us to a close on this, the question I get asked, not irregularly, is, Guy, I'm looking at moving into the exec coaching space, particularly, from certain people go, do you think I should get a certificate? Should I go and get a qualification? And I've always kind of gone, oh, the question of questions. Always. I just noticed the internet is pausing and freezing, so we'll see how this goes in the edit. And I've always been very careful when I've answered that, and I've always said yes if you know why you're getting it. And I've probably had a whole load of reasons for that, but I think I'm slightly changing my answer to not just yes with a in it, but I think, yeah, probably you should. You probably do. On balance, you're going to get learning, challenge, a level of competence that, your character and you have to go on top of that. It's not your validity, but it's a piece of the story of you, and it'll be the growth. But here's the thing: choose wisely. I think that's the bit.
That's my view. Should I decorate my bedroom? Should I get a painter and decorator to decorate? Depends who you choose. And I think that's, in a sense, what we're cautioning people is to say there's nothing right or wrong necessarily with doing a qualification, but there's an awful lot of difference between qualifications that look to be the same. They're not the same.
Yeah.
Choose carefully. Caveat emptor, really.
Yeah, totally. Okay, well, I think that's a great place for us to close. So on that note, for those that are listening, choose wisely. Thank you very much, David.